5 keys to reducing inflammation. This is a really important topic because inflammation underlies most of our chronic diseases and most chronic symptoms. We're going to go into that tonight. And there's so much we can do to reduce inflammation and to feel better. And I think most people don't realize how inflammation is connected to something that they may be struggling with, because it can feel very disconnected. It can be surprising to realize how things are related. So we're going to get into that. Just a little bit about me. I'm Dr. Tracy McCarthy. I am a medical doctor and I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what functional medicine is. First, though, I want to begin with the story of Carol. When I first met Carol, she was feeling really, really defeated and just totally run down. She admitted to me that she'd even recently struggled with some suicidal thoughts. She was having panic attacks. She was having a lot of abdominal pain, a lot of fatigue, and she'd been steadily gaining weight. She was just feeling like things were getting worse and worse, no matter what she did to try to solve it. And she actually attended a talk just like this actually it was live at the Sacramento Food Co-op. And when I went into that talk was focused on the connection of the gut and the brain, and she started to see how this actually applied to her. And she chose to work with me, and we were able to really transform her health. And I'm going to explain how at the end of this talk. But I just want to say that, if Carol had come to me 10 years earlier, all I could have done for her as a psychiatrist would be to offer her an antidepressant and recommend psychotherapy. And both of those can help, of course, but they would never have addressed the root causes and all these other symptoms she was having, right? Her abdominal pain, her fatigue, her weight gain, and the panic attacks, and the brain fog she was experiencing, and the insomnia she also had. There was just a long list of symptoms, also allergies. So this is how she was feeling when she first met me. And my heart went out to her, as it does to all my patients, because when you're in that kind of situation, the joy is gone from life. You're not able to accomplish your goals anymore. Your relationships are affected. Your finances can be affected. You're spending lots of time and energy and money on trying to get better. You can't maybe do your work as well, or maybe you cannot progress at work. So that impacts your finances. It just takes over, and it really just robs your life of joy. So, I'm so fortunate because she didn't come to me 10 years ago. And I was so lucky to get to learn about the power of nutrition. And that was the beginning for me of this whole journey into functional medicine. I discovered this information because of my sister's health challenges. She was struggling with infertility and polycystic ovarian syndrome and weight issues. And she's a biologist, and she got really into reading the research on nutrition related to this. And she sent it my way. And I have to say, I was floored. How could I have gone to 4 years of medical school and not have learned any of this nutrition research? Well, unfortunately, that is not a rare situation. The nutrition education in medical schools is very limited and focused on extremes of nutritional deficiencies like rickets, if you don't have any vitamin D, for example, and things that we just don't tend to see in our culture and our modern day life here in America. And yet nutrition impacts everything. And I was just floored by this information, and it took over for me. I had to learn more, and I just went down the rabbit hole, and I began to see so much was out there that I had not learned that could really help people. And the more I studied, the more I saw that there were amazing outcomes out there. People with autoimmune diseases having reversal of symptoms, people's mood improving, depression being treated without medication. This was amazing to me and so powerful. And really, this was why I had gone into medicine, right? Was to understand why people suffer, what goes wrong in the body, and how can we really resolve that? Not just to treat these symptoms with Band-Aids that would suppress symptoms, but not really resolve the root causes. Honestly, when I learned this information and realized what I hadn't learned, I got pretty mad. But I channeled that anger into really learning everything I could and a determination to bring that information to my community, like I'm doing tonight with you, and to my patients. And that led me to found my outpatient practice, Catalyst Health Center for Functional Medicine, and train in this concept of functional medicine, which is really just medicine, applying the principles of nutrition and lifestyle changes and the power that those can bring, and a personalized approach. And we'll get into that now. And really, it's all about harnessing this natural healing force within us. What I learned when I studied nutrition more and read some of the anthropological research on hunter-gatherer tribes and how they lacked the chronic diseases that we have, I realized something really, really important. It sounds so simple, but it was really a paradigm shift for me. And that is that we are meant to be healthy. I used to think disease was inevitable, that we had to fight it like a battle. That was sort of the metaphor that I was taught. But really, we have within us what it takes to be healthy, and we need to harness that power. We need to give our bodies what they need and get out of their way so we can heal. So what is functional medicine? It is a personalized systems-based approach. And when I say systems, I mean like a detoxification system or communication systems in the body, like neurotransmitters or hormones. It's not dividing the body up the way we do in conventional medicine right now with silos, like, so you see a neurologist for some brain problems, you see a psychiatrist for other brain problems, or a cardiologist or gastroenterologist, where everyone's very separate. This is looking at the whole body, but viewing the systems within. It uses advanced testing and really looking at tests that you may normally get at the doctor, but looking at the optimal ranges of those values rather than the more extreme definitions of what causes disease. And doing in-depth listening to patients and taking the time to really hear their story and make the connections that lead us to those hidden root causes. We harness the body's natural healing processes. There's no other way to actually heal. You have to work with the body. And what it turns out is that the most effective way to do that is to use nutrition and lifestyle changes. Because if we don't do that, we're still causing the same problems that led to the symptoms, which you're going to see in tonight's talk. So key concepts in functional medicine are that chronic conditions have multiple causes. This is really important. We in our society tend to think in terms of what's the single cause of something. And this works pretty well for infectious disease, like with tuberculosis, we know there's a bacteria that causes it. But with chronic illness, it's always multiple factors that are adding up. And they're not the same factors in every single person, which is partly why I think people don't tend to recognize this. There are, though, common patterns that lead to inflammation, and that inflammation is what we're going to be discussing more tonight. Another key concept in functional medicine is the role of the microbiome, or the gut bacteria and other bugs that live in the gut. Also, the role of genetics and how we're all different with our genetics and how that plays out in our biochemistry. The role of energy production in every cell is very important. The role of detoxification, which our body is doing every day to get rid of things that we don't need anymore or things we may have ingested that we need to excrete. And the role of the environment. And when I say environment, I don't just mean the air we breathe or the water we drink, but also the food we're eating every day, the relationships we are in, what our light environment is like. So many things play into the role of the environment because that environment is interacting with our genes. So tonight's talk is the 5 keys to reducing inflammation. And here are the 5 keys we're going to talk about: nutrition and digestion, food triggers, the gut, stress, and toxins. So first of all, what is inflammation? Well, historically, it's defined by these Latin terms: rubor, tumor, dolor, and color. And if you know Spanish, you can probably figure out what those mean. But rubor is redness, tumor is swelling, dolor is pain, and color is heat. Those are the signs of inflammation. So if you've ever, for example, sprained your ankle, you will get redness and swelling, and it will hurt, and it will be warm to the touch. That's all signs of the body trying to heal the injury. So this is a really natural process, and it's a critically important process. We need inflammation or we could never heal from an injury. And those are the 4 hallmark symptoms of inflammation. And that's a situation of acute inflammation. So acute meaning happening right away and should resolve. But there's another kind of inflammation. That's what we're focusing on tonight. And that is chronic inflammation. That's inflammation that is not resolving. So normally when there's an injury or an infection, the immune system mounts a response and the inflammation rises, and there's this whole cascade of signals, and eventually it resolves. In fact, some of the signaling molecules are called resolvins, and the inflammation should go away once the problem is dealt with. But if the inflammation is being triggered constantly and it cannot be resolved, that trigger cannot be gotten rid of, then the inflammation becomes chronic. And that causes a whole host of problems because there's always collateral damage when there's inflammation. And if that's ongoing, then organs and tissues are getting damaged. That inflammation can be totally silent. You may not feel it or notice any symptoms. And examples of that are Alzheimer's disease, which really sets in decades before you begin to have the symptoms of cognitive impairment, or high blood pressure, which can be totally asymptomatic. Maybe eventually you experience headaches, but many people never have symptoms. And yet the inflammation is ongoing. But there are many, many symptoms of inflammation that can occur. And most chronic disease is a manifestation of inflammation. So some very common symptoms that I've listed here, and this is just the tip of the iceberg: brain fog, skin rashes, depression, pain, fatigue, insomnia. So let's start with the first key, nutrition and digestion. Why does this matter for reducing inflammation? Well, we need nutrients to have a balanced immune system. And as I mentioned, inflammation is very important. You need it, but you don't want it to be chronic and ongoing or overly, you don't want an overreaction on the body. You need your immune system to be balanced, not wiped out. That's the problem with some of the medications used for example, for autoimmunity, that they can really shut down components of the immune system. We don't want to do that. We just want to bring it into balance. And to have it balanced, you need the proper nutrients. You need that healthy immune response and inflammation to heal properly. And you need the nutrients for detoxification. You need it to build every cell in your body. So what does a nutrient-dense diet look like then that contains the nutrients needed? It needs to contain omega-3 fats, which are usually very, very low in most Americans' diet. It needs to be rich in vitamins and minerals. It needs to contain healthy fats. Healthy fats are, for example, avocado contains healthy fats, or coconut oil, or if you don't have a dairy intolerance, then grass-fed butter is a really great one, a pastured butter, we call it. And also fats from pastured animals can be very healthy. In contrast, the unhealthy fats would be from the industrial seed oils like canola oil or corn oil or peanut oil. These contain omega-6 fats in high amounts and are usually damaged or rancid, and these are very inflammatory. A nutrient-dense diet also is high in fiber. We'll see more about how that impacts the gut microbiome. And it contains adequate clean protein. So, without enough protein, you cannot do all the steps of having a healthy immune system. You cannot build the cells of the body. So we need a nutrient-dense diet to reduce inflammation. Another key for nutrition and digestion is having proper supplementation. So, for example, most people I see in my practice are low in vitamin D, and that has to do with, where we are in the world. It has to do with skin color. It has to do with exposure to light, and also genetics. Some people have to work much harder to get their vitamin D up than other people. Magnesium is something missing from the soil much more than it used to be. We used to be able to get more adequate magnesium from our vegetables and fruits. So at this point, it's really critical to supplement with magnesium. It's hard to get enough from the diet. And then you got to personalize this. Some people, for example, if you're following a vegan diet, you're going to need to supplement with vitamin B12. Most people do need to supplement with omega-3s because their diet is low in that. And many people don't get enough zinc, for example. So, and the list goes on, but making sure that you are filling any gaps that are missing because of the diet, or maybe it can't be obtained from the diet. And digestion is the other part of this key, because you can be eating all the nutrients you want, you can be having the perfect supplementation, but if you're not digesting and absorbing correctly, then that is not getting into your system at all. And that's just at that point, what we call expensive poop. It is not effective. So how does digestion work, and how can we make sure that it's working? Well, first of all, it begins in the brain. Most people don't really think about that. In fact, most images showing the digestive tract, if you Google that, will show it, the body from the neck down. They just leave out the mouth and the brain altogether. But digestion begins when you see your food and you smell your food and when you prepare your food. It gets your body ready to eat. It gets your salivary glands activated. It begins to get you to produce stomach acid, prepares you to make digestive enzymes. And smelling your food, looking at it, anticipating it is a critical step. And then actually chewing your food. Chewing adequately is very, very important. It's the beginning of breaking down the food. And your very first digestive enzyme, amylase, which breaks down starch, is in your mouth and contained in saliva. So you're mixing in that amylase with the food. And then in the stomach, it's further mashed up and it's mixed with the stomach acid. And that stomach acid is critically important. If you don't have enough of it, then you will not release enough digestive enzymes when the food passes on to the first part of the small intestine, and the pancreas releases the digestive enzymes. So those other enzymes break down fats and proteins and more carbohydrates into their smallest components so that they can be absorbed. And they will, at that point, you'll be able to take them into your system. But if you are not breaking them down, then the bacteria, which should not be in the small intestine, we'll talk more about that later, but any bacteria that are there can begin to flourish. And then, so the small intestine is essentially your body's place to take in the nutrients. Then whatever's left over, so undigested fiber that we can't break down, is passed on to the large intestine, where bacteria break that down and liberate more nutrients. And they have a number of other roles as well. But that's the way digestion is supposed to work. And I just want to add, you may have questions during tonight's talk. That's wonderful. Please jot them down. We'll have time at the end, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So this is the proper order of digestion. Without it, again, all your wonderful food and your supplementation will not be able to actually be absorbed. Okay, so how do we support digestion then? First thing is to be in the rest and digest mode. I bet most of you have heard of the fight or flight mode. That is what we call the sympathetic nervous system. And that's triggered when we are trying to run for our lives or we're fearful. And it's there to help us survive. But many of us run around all day in the fight or flight mode because of stress, right? We're running late. We have a huge to-do list. There's a lot going on. But that really can backfire on our digestion because we literally don't digest when we're in that state. We have to be in its opposite state, the parasympathetic state, and that is the rest and digest mode. When we're in the parasympathetic state, then we make stomach acid, then we release digestive enzymes. So that's very, very important for actually having digestion work. It's one of the reasons why stress can cause so much digestive upset, because it's just all not working at that point. So how do we switch from that fight or flight mode to the rest and digest mode? The simple step is to actually just try to do some deep breathing before you eat. Like this is where maybe you have the tradition of saying grace or a prayer. That is a nice way to shift into that mode of gratitude. It puts us in a more calm state. You can take several deep breaths. You can meditate just even for a minute or two. Those will all help you to shift your body and your brain into that state. Really looking at the food and smelling it, again, that triggers the salivary release, it triggers digestive enzymes and stomach acid. And chewing thoroughly, not wolfing down the food, but chewing much more than you are used to doing. That's the best way to really get the digestive juices flowing. And then the last thing is avoid multitasking. How many of us are guilty of eating while we're on our computers and on our phones or driving even? This really impairs digestion. So taking time out to stop everything and appreciate the food and take time to eat it is going to really make a huge difference in your ability to absorb nutrients, which is going to have the downstream effect of reducing inflammation. Okay, the next key for reducing inflammation is food triggers. So I think of this in two categories. There's foods that are inflammatory and inflammatory for everyone. And then there's foods that may be causing you in particular an immune reaction. Not everybody would react to that food that way, but in your body, it's causing that. So inflammatory foods are things like refined carbohydrates, so like flours, sugar. Food additives can be very inflammatory. Then there's something called AGEs, which are advanced glycation end products. So that's food that gets like charred, too much sort of caramelization of things. This becomes a trigger for inflammation in the body. So more gentle ways of cooking can be less inflammatory. And then I mentioned earlier some of those industrial seed oils with the high degree of omega-6 fats that are damaged. Those are very inflammatory. So really avoiding those kind of oils when you're cooking. When you eat out, that's usually the kind of oils that are used. So reducing how much you're eating out can make a big difference in reducing your exposure to those fats. You have a lot more control over that when you're cooking at home. Now, the other category is foods that are causing an immune reaction. We call those food intolerances. There are also food allergies. That is one particular type of immune reaction called an IgE reaction. And those are usually pretty rapid response, like swelling or hives, difficulty breathing that happens very quickly after consuming a food. Most people know if they have that because the reaction is so quick. But you can also have a different antibody reaction. Instead of IgE, you could react with IgG antibodies. That can actually cause the reactions to be experienced a few days later. So often people do not make those connections. Those are called food intolerances. And common things that people are intolerant to are wheat and the big protein in wheat called gluten. You can react to other components of wheat as well. But the dairy, usually the dairy protein called casein is the big trigger there for immune reactions, though you can also have problems tolerating lactose, but that's not an immune response so much as an impact on gut bacteria. Eggs, the protein in eggs can be an immune trigger. Nuts for many people. And then legumes, for some people, an immune trigger, and for other people, there's difficulty in digesting it because of the sugars in beans are digested instead by bacteria that are out of place in the small intestine, and that can cause a lot of symptoms. And soy is another trigger. So the point of this is to realize that everybody is different in terms of how their immune system tolerates foods. And you may be eating something that is chronically triggering symptoms and you don't even realize it because you've always eaten that and you've always felt this way and you never made the connection. The trick to identifying food intolerances is to actually do an elimination diet. That means to cut out the common food triggers and do that for usually a minimum of 3 weeks, but 4 weeks is better. And see how you feel different. And then the big key is reintroducing one item at a time. So for example, if you cut out the items on this list, maybe the first thing you bring back is eggs, and you just add a bit of egg each day for a few days. You don't add any of these other things back in, and then you see oh, my rash came back, or my joint pain is back again. And then you can start to get an idea that that's a food trigger for you. When you add these foods back in one at a time, that is actually the gold standard way to test for this. There's all kinds of food testing you can do, and some of it is helpful, but an elimination diet is the best way to find out what is the right diet for you, and are you experiencing any food triggers? It can be very surprising. So the next key is the gut. We're going to talk about a few components of the gut. We could really make an entire talk about the gut. I've done that many times, but I'm going to summarize tonight. The gut plays a huge role in inflammation, huge. And we get more research every day that comes out on how that is, how they're connected. First, I want to talk about this concept of leaky gut. Leaky gut is something that is called, technically, the scientific term is increased intestinal permeability. And this means that the normal amount of permeability in the gut, or like things that can cross the gut lining into the body, goes up. And now things are crossing from the inside of the gut into your bloodstream, across the lining of the gut, that should not. And that's where the problem comes. So what happens is pieces of bacteria that are in the gut, or food fragments like proteins like gluten, which are very large, that if they're not fully digested, they are entering the bloodstream. Toxins are entering the bloodstream at this point, and your immune system is living right there in the blood and is looking and monitoring, policing, trying to see if it needs to remove anything and mount a response. And so these different things, when the immune system comes into contact with them, the immune system sends out the alarm and begins a response. And this is what triggers the inflammation. And this is why it's so important to heal a leaky gut, so that you can calm the inflammation and calm that immune triggering. A number of things will cause a leaky gut. I'm going to go back to that. It's a long list, but stress is a big one. Imbalances in gut bacteria, which we'll talk about. Those are just a few of them. Food triggers that we mentioned, they will trigger a leaky gut as well. And so it's really important to figure out what may be causing your leaky gut and to work to heal that, because that's one of the very most powerful ways to calm inflammation in the entire body. When this is occurring in the gut, the symptoms can show up anywhere. And this is why, your reaction to a food trigger could be a brain fog. That's very, very common, because that, that trigger is entering the entering the bloodstream. The immune system is responding, and that is a systemic response, including in the brain. The other component of the gut that's so very important for inflammation is the microbiome. That means all the bacteria and the yeast and the viruses and even the worms, if they're there, that are living in your gut. We have microbiome also on our skin and everywhere on and in our body, but most of it, 99% of it, is housed in the large intestine. And actually the total of all the bacteria in the gut weighs about 2 to 3 pounds. It's sort of like another organ. And it has a whole lot of jobs. It's supposed to be there. It's critically important. We need to have it. And it helps break down those fibers that we don't digest ourselves, which liberates fatty acids. And those fatty acids are fuel for the lining of our large intestine and fuel for other beneficial bacteria. They help detoxify. They interact with our nervous system and our immune system. These bacteria make all kinds of chemicals. And when they're the right bacteria in the right amounts, they can really help our body and our brain and our nervous system to know that everything is okay, and to feel calm and to feel sharp and to be really in balance. We get our microbiome when we're born. When we pass through the birth canal, we get our mother's microbiome. And when we breastfeed, we get bacteria that way too. That's a very specific type of bacteria that is supposed to be some of the first bacteria we get in our gut. And the breast milk also specifically has components for feeding that beneficial bacteria. And then what we eat as we grow impacts it. And when we don't get it, the right quote unquote bacteria, because of maybe there was a Many people, of course, are born via C-section, which can be life-saving, but it can have the unintended consequences of a baby getting a different microbiome from the hands of hospital staff. And that occurs even with gloves on. That's just been shown in research. And from formula feeding, that shifts the microbiome as well. And every time we have to have antibiotics, which we may need, but that can kill off a lot of our microbiome. And so it shifts over time, and it can end up to be very imbalanced. We can end up with overgrowths of all kinds of bacteria, which maybe are supposed to be present, but not in the amounts now that you're experiencing. We can end up with yeast overgrowth. We can also end up with a lack of beneficial bacteria. All of those are different types of dysbiosis or bacterial imbalances. And I see all of these different kinds in my practice. You can also end up with infections like a parasite infection, for example, with the protozoa. Many people have heard of Giardia, which you can get from drinking from a river or lake. That's an example of a protozoal infection, but there's many others, and they're really not rare. I see them a lot in my practice, and they cause a lot of inflammation and a whole lot of body symptoms. So this microbiome is just hugely impactful, and it, in our modern society with all these factors that I've just mentioned, many of us end up with an imbalanced microbiome. When those bacteria are not in balance, that really impacts our whole immune system. It triggers a lot of inflammation and shows up as a whole host of symptoms. So I hope you're starting to see how these connect, how these underlying causes really connect to symptoms that you may have chronically because of the link to inflammation, and how when we work on the health of our microbiome, it can impact, it can reduce our inflammation. When we reduce food triggers, when we make sure we have enough nutrients. So how do we support bacteria? We can't go back and be born differently or be, breastfed instead of bottle fed. I mean, that's not anybody's fault. But what do we do to shift it? Well, it really comes down to the food we're putting in our bodies every single day. So eating a highly colorful vegetable diet, like what I'm saying is eat the rainbow, a wide variety of colorful vegetables, also fruits, having healthy proteins, making sure there's enough fiber, especially vegetable fiber. The variety of vegetable fiber produces a variety and a diversity of bacterial growth, and that's important. You want good diversity in your gut. Avoiding processed foods. Processed foods really feed bacteria that we don't want overgrown. We can use probiotics as a tool, which will impact the gut microbiome as they pass through. They don't really seed the intestine like a garden, but they do impact it as they pass through, and that's helpful. And they impact our immune system and our nervous system. And fermented foods are a great form of probiotic. Now, the fourth key is stress. This is a huge, huge one. Has such a huge role in inflammation. Most of this is occurring via the stress hormone cortisol, which is produced by our adrenal glands. Cortisol inhibits our immune system. Now, cortisol is kind of like inflammation. You need cortisol to live, and it needs to be in proper balance. It's a normal response to stress. But when stress is ongoing, then cortisol's up, elevated all the time. It causes a lot of collateral damage. So cortisol's job is to free up glucose for your brain to deal with a crisis. But it does this by shutting down a bunch of other things. And in the process, this is depleting nutrients. That cortisol, that high cortisol, will actually change the composition of gut bacteria in your gut. It causes leaky gut, and it impacts all the other hormones in the body. It'll impact insulin and thyroid and progesterone and estrogen and testosterone. There are a lot of different kinds of stress. And I think we're used to thinking of maybe emotional stress, our to-do list, or, financial worries. But stress is also physical. Blood sugar going up and down because of a diet high in refined carbohydrates, for example, or a poor absorption of fats. That's going to cause blood sugar swings, and those are very inflammatory. It's causing our insulin to go up and down. Overtraining. So exercise, of course, is good for us, but it has to be the right amount for what our body needs. And if we're overdoing it, that's a stressor that's going to trigger more cortisol, that's going to have an inflammatory effect on the body. Injury is a physical stressor, infection in the gut, those are all stressors as well. And toxic burden, the more toxins we take on, the more that is a physical stress. Now, emotional stress is probably more familiar. Obviously, there's psychological stress, stress in relationships, but it's also when we lack a community, or we lack a sense of purpose, or lack of physical contact. You know, we really evolved to be having touch with other people, to be in a tribe, in community, and to have that sense of purpose. And unfortunately, right now, the lack of community, the lack of physical contact, these are big problems with our current pandemic. We have to work extra hard to find those where we can safely. And, you know, I think we're really seeing the impact of that with the huge rise in anxiety and depression right now. Part of it is this lack of community and lack of physical contact. But these cause increased cortisol and trigger inflammation in the body. One of the very best ways to counter the stress is to work on sleep. And most people don't realize that sleep and circadian rhythm is very much linked to our light exposure. I mentioned earlier that the environment includes light exposure. So right now, for example, I'm sitting with a bright light so you can see me, but really this is the wrong time of day for me to have that light, right? It's going to be much harder for me to fall asleep tonight than it normally is. And that's because I really take good care of my light exposure. So what do I mean by healthy light exposure? That is that get outside in the morning and maybe midday, get some sunlight. Even on a overcast day, it's still bright daylight compared to being indoors. And this tells your brain that it's daytime. So many systems in the body are linked to these clock genes. They're actually called clock genes. And they're looking for signals to tell them when is it day and when is it night. And light is the number one signal. Now, the opposite of what we want to do in the morning is at night, we want to avoid bright lights. So we want to be really mindful of our screen exposure, like TVs, iPads, tablets, laptops, phones. There's sometimes you can opt to put a setting on, like for an iPhone, for example, there's night shift, and you can make it a more of an amber appearing screen that blocks some of that blue light. And the blue light waves are the ones that are telling your brain it's morning. You do not want to be sending the signal that it's morning to your brain when it's actually time to start unwinding and relaxing for bed. Making sure that you're really attending to this and minimizing screen exposure at bedtime, minimizing bright light exposure, maybe using blue light blocking glasses even. This can make a huge difference in getting better sleep, better quality sleep, and sending the right signals to your brain, which is in charge of that cortisol rhythm. Cortisol is supposed to go up in the morning and go down during the day, and that can get way out of whack when our circadian rhythm is out of whack, and that is inflammatory. There are other keys for healthy night's sleep, like sleeping in a cool environment, dark environment, getting rid of all the little flashing or bright LED lights from chargers and things like that, getting your phone out of your room, ideally not having a TV in your room either. These are all really helpful. Other keys for reducing stress, treating infections, right? I talked about how infections are a physical stressor, balancing blood sugar, reducing toxins, which we'll talk about more, and removing those food triggers. Also, getting physical activity. It's a wonderful stress reliever when it's in the right amount. And the right amount is going to be different from person to person. And for any one person, it may be different at different seasons of life or even on different days, depending on how well you slept the night before or what your current stress level is. Time in nature is very therapeutic, very stress reducing. There's lots of research on using gratitude journaling and having a gratitude practice and how that can reduce stress and improve mood. Meditation is huge. It actually really changes our brains and is helpful for helping our brain learn how to shift out of fight or flight and into that rest and digest mode. Counseling for psychological stress or relational stress or trauma, and play and laughter. These are wonderful antidotes to stress. The last key for reducing inflammation is toxins. So toxins come in many forms, and they trigger our immune system. They damage the energy production capacity in our cells. Mitochondria are the little energy factories in every cell in our body, and they are very, very exquisitely sensitive to toxins. And the immune response requires a lot of energy. And if we don't have enough energy, you're not going to be having a balanced immune system. So these toxins damage the mitochondria. Toxins also frequently disrupt hormones. The most common toxins that I run into in my practice are the xenoestrogens. That means alien estrogens. They're estrogen mimicking compounds. Those are found in so many personal care products and scents, fragrances. Those are, for example, phthalates and parabens. There are another huge problem is mold. I treat so many people with a host of symptoms, and often an interesting sort of perplexing seemingly mix of symptoms, and one of the big underlying causes ends up being mold exposure from a water damaged building that they didn't even really realize was there, or they knew it but they moved out and they never made the connection that they got sicker in that time. And those mold toxins can continue to circulate in the body. We have a hard time excreting them, and they really dysregulate the immune system and cause a lot of problems. Pesticides like glyphosate, or better known as Roundup, which is in so many of the grain products like wheat products or corn products that you buy, and that causes more hormone disruption. Heavy metals like mercury in dental amalgams or in tuna, or lead, these metals can cause extreme damage to mitochondria and really trigger inflammation. So what do we do about it? Well, we can reduce our toxic burden. We can't control our exposure to every toxin in the environment, and I don't think that that's a reasonable goal, but we can control certain things. And the idea is to focus on what we can control, reducing our exposure, and then improving our ability to detoxify and remove toxins from our body. So eating organic foods can make a huge difference. I mean, you're putting food in your body at least 3 times a day, most likely. So eating organic food really can reduce that load. Using safe personal care products. And this is where, going to the co-op is such a wonderful resource. I really love to see what are the different products that come out, and you're going to see a whole huge option list, array of options that are going to say no parabens, no phthalates, and that's really, really important. I mean, your shampoo, your makeup, your lotions, your toothpaste, your deodorant, all of these things can be full of toxins. And, most women put like over 100 chemicals on their body every single day, just in their normal routines. So picking personal care products that are safe can really vastly reduce your toxic burden. And in the process, you're reducing all these estrogen mimicking compounds that are causing havoc and can be causing your PMS symptoms and affecting your gut microbiome and just overall how you feel. Likewise, safe household cleaning products, making sure you have access to clean water, and using safe cookware, like avoiding Teflon, for example, or don't microwave in plastic. Microwaving in plastic is a really great way to get a lot of xenoestrogens. And improving your body's ability to detoxify. So making sure that you're having regular bowel movements. If you're constipated, then you're not getting the bowel movements out and you're not getting the toxins out regularly, and that's a problem. They can be reabsorbed in the gut. Making sure that you're doing exercises or sauna that are causing sweating, because sweating is one of the really great routes that we eliminate many toxins. Eating a lot of cruciferous vegetables like broccoli or cauliflower or kale, they help tremendously with detoxification pathways in the body. And making sure you're getting enough fiber, because that supports the gut microbiome and their detoxification role. So we've gone over the 5 keys for reducing inflammation. And now I want to go back to our original story of Carol and how she got better and how we reduced her inflammation. And I'm going to lead you through her story with talking about my 5-step system for healing. This is how I work with patients. And this is what I'm so grateful to have developed with all the learning and the studying I did and the work with patients, because this can make tremendous difference in people's lives. And it's just so gratifying to see them really heal and thrive and feel like they deserve to feel in a way that, just giving medications never could have done for them, in my experience. So the first step is make the connections. Second step is uncover hidden causes. The third is to nourish and replenish. 4 is to rebalance the body systems. And 5 is retrain the brain. And I'm going to explain what these all are. Step 1, make the connections. So we're doing that tonight. This has been a deep dive into making the connections. You're seeing how toxins and food triggers, nutrition, how all of that impacts inflammation. And when I work one-on-one with a patient, and when I work with Carol, we mapped out her history in great detail on this functional medicine timeline. We look at the antecedents. What was the stage that was set when she was born? What was maybe the genetic predispositions? For example, in her history, there were family members that had had their gallbladders out, and this was a common problem. Triggering events, living in a moldy home, we found out later was very important. When she had her gallbladder removed herself, that was a major trigger. Mediators would be like eating the standard American diet for a lot of years, or being in a very stressful relationship for a while. These are all factors that get mapped onto this timeline along with the symptoms, and it allows us to see the connections. And what we observed was that in her case, so many of her symptoms, like her abdominal pain and her panic attacks, started after the gallbladder had been removed. And this has everything to do with digestion and absorption being disrupted, and then the beginning of nutrient deficiencies and her microbiome being further disrupted. It was actually disrupted earlier because we knew from this timeline that she had been formula fed and had had antibiotics, and this had shifted her microbiome. And as a result, she'd begin to experience allergies and other symptoms. So this is the chance. This is where we make the connections and we start to see what might have been the key factors to connect to the symptoms that you're experiencing. The second step is uncover hidden causes. And we do this with the history taking, but also with advanced testing. And this is an example of a part of Carol's stool test. And this tells us about some of the bacteria that are present in her gut. And you can see here that there is a whole list of, most of these bacteria actually have an H, a red H next to them, which means that they are significantly overgrown. So there was a whole pattern here of bacterial overgrowth, and this was causing so many symptoms for her. And this bacteria was overgrown not just in the large intestine, but up in the small intestine where the bacteria is not supposed to be. Now they're competing for her food, where she should be absorbing the food. The bacteria are there. They're causing gas to be released because they produce gases that causes bloating. They're causing all kinds of inflammation. So these tests are critically important in identifying the imbalances. Well, this was not the only test we did. Ultimately, we also tested for mold, which she had. We did a urine test that looks at a whole bunch of factors to do with mitochondria and nutrition and bacteria and yeast. And we did extensive blood work showing nutrient levels, inflammatory markers, hormone levels, and more. Step 3, nourish and replenish. Really getting on an anti-inflammatory diet, identifying food triggers. That was really key for her. Getting off of gluten made a huge, huge difference. And we worked significantly on digestion. And so the nutrients were actually getting absorbed. The fact that she had her gallbladder out meant that she was not able to break down fats well and absorb them, which caused blood sugar swings as well as a lack of good fats in her system. And part of Nourish and Replenish is adding back anything that we find is missing when we assess her nutrient status on the testing. And rebalance body systems is next. So sometimes that means supplementing hormones, or it's treating the bacterial overgrowths, removing the mold toxins, checking the home for mold and making sure that that's treated. And more, but rebalancing the body systems is fundamental. That's working with the body's healing ability. And the last step is something very unique and really a specialty in our practice, in my practice at Catalyst Health, and that is retraining the brain. We actually have a brain retraining coach. And what this means is this part of the brain, the limbic system that's sort of highlighted in this picture, them is the old mammalian brain. And it has a very important job of scanning the environment for threats and reacting to them. It's there to save your life. And it does its job when it learns that different things are to be feared, or it has to create a reaction to certain things for your safety. However, that limbic system can really start to backfire on you when you're beginning to heal. It can put a lid on how well you can get, because your brain may still think that that bacteria is present in the gut, or that this food is still an issue for you, or that you're still in this stressful relationship that you may have moved on from. And we'll be creating these patterns that cause inflammation in your body when that's not actually a helpful response anymore. So we have to help the brain realize that things are different. And we also can harness the power of the brain in the reactions it makes in the body to change the inflammation. So we can visualize, we can do practices that are going to create new neural pathways and result in less inflammation. It's very nuanced and more complicated than that, but I wanted to give you a taste of it because it's one of our super powerful tools that we combine with all the testing and treatment. And that was a big part of how Carol got better. One of the first benefits of brain retraining is actually lifting the mood, and she experienced that right away. So now let me tell you how Carol is doing. She has energy. Her depression and panic are gone. She's super focused now. Her brain fog has lifted, and she was able to actually get a new job that she felt was more aligned with what she wanted. She felt confident now and able to go get that job because she knew her brain was working well. Her abdominal pain completely resolved. Allergies are reduced. Her energy's improved. And what was I going to say there? She has the abdominal pain is all gone, and she has had I know what I was going to say. She also lost a great deal of weight. And she said she wasn't even expecting that. But what happens when the inflammation gets resolved is that the body realizes it can release the weight. The hormones are balanced better. Her blood sugar is balanced because she's now absorbing those fats that she couldn't absorb before. And that is counterbalancing the glucose. And she's off the food triggers. So she's had a total transformation in her health. And she has said several times, it's what she's been so amazed by is to realize that it's all of these pieces working together, right? That's what the key is. It's not one thing. We got to get out of that mindset that it's what's the one thing that's going to make me feel better, because it isn't. It's a comprehensive approach. So I want to encourage you that if you are thinking, my gosh, this is something I want to learn more about, I have a whole bunch of symptoms that I want to treat and really get to the root of, or I want to get your opinion on this, I want to encourage you to book a free discovery call with my patient care coordinator. We have she will go into depth with you to talk about what's going on and talk about what our program is like, and you can learn more about it. And then she can set you up with a wellness breakthrough session with me, where we can talk one-on-one about what's going on for you. And I can give you my opinion about what is the best next step for you to take to get to a place of health. And that looks different for everybody. Okay, I'm going to